Good morning, class. Last meeting, we discussed about sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is a type of reproduction that involves a complex life cycle in which a gamete, such as a sperm or an egg cell, with a single set of chromosomes like haploid, combines with another to produce an organism composed of cells with two sets of chromosomes like diploid. It consists of a set of events that can be divided into three stages, which are pre-fertilization, fertilization, and post-fertilization. Before we start with our lesson for today, let us first have a game. Kindly count from 1 to 3. This game is called Number Substitution Zipper. This is very easy, yet an interesting game. You just have to substitute the numbers written in your activity sheets with letters in the alphabet. For example, number 1 will be substituted with letter A since it is the first letter of the alphabet, and so on and so forth. Got it? Okay, we are now with the activity and this is your activity sheet. Get one and pass to the other groups. Do not read it first, just hold and wait for my signal to open your activity sheets. Okay, now that every group has already a copy of their activity sheets, I will now count 1 to 3, and after 3, I will say the word open, which is your cue to open your activity sheets. Then, you may immediately proceed substituting the numbers with letters in the alphabet. The first group who will yell done will be the winner, provided that they will substitute the numbers correctly. Understood? Okay, 1, 2, 3, open. A few moments later. Group Anonymous is the winner. Group Ambiguous is in the second place, and Group Tentative is in the third place. Congratulations! So from the activity that you did earlier, the words that you deciphered are components of an ecosystem, which will be the topic for our discussion for today. So now let us proceed to our discussion about the components of an ecosystem. Before we start, at any given point of time, do you find yourself to be surrounded by nature with all its beauty in the form of trees, plants, lakes, rivers, animals, insects, among others? Do you think there is some form of contact or collaboration between the living and the non-living components of ecosystem? Before we start with the discussion about components of an ecosystem, we should first have to discuss what is an ecosystem all about. Living organisms seem to interact among themselves and with the physical environment. This, in short, can be called an ecosystem. Ecosystem is a geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms, as well as weather and landscape, work together to form a bubble of life. It is a community or group of living organisms that live in and interact with each other in a specific environment. The term ecosystem was first coined by A.J. Tansley, an English botanist, in 1935. An ecosystem can be as small as an oasis in a desert, or as big as an ocean, spinning thousands of miles. There are two types of ecosystem, the terrestrial ecosystem and the aquatic ecosystem. Terrestrial ecosystems are exclusively land-based ecosystems. There are different types of terrestrial ecosystems distributed around various geological zones, namely forest ecosystems, grassland ecosystems, tundra ecosystems, and desert ecosystems. Forest ecosystem consists of several plants, animals, and microorganisms that live in coordination with the abiotic factors of the environment. Forests help in maintaining the temperature of the earth, and they are the major carbon sink. Grassland ecosystem is dominated by grasses and herbs. Temperature grasslands and savanna grasslands are some of the examples of grassland ecosystem. Tundra ecosystems are devoid of trees and are found in cold climates where rainfall is scarce. These are covered with snow for most of the year. The ecosystem in the Arctic or mountain tops is tundra type. Lastly, desert ecosystems. Deserts are found throughout the world. They are regions or There are regions with very little rainfall. The days are hot and the nights are cold. On the other hand, aquatic ecosystems are ecosystems present in a body of water. These can be further divided into two types, namely freshwater ecosystem and marine ecosystem. Freshwater ecosystem is an aquatic ecosystem. When we say aquatic, it has something to do with water. That includes lakes, ponds, rivers, streams, and wetlands. These have no salt content in contrast with the marine ecosystem. Meanwhile, marine ecosystem includes seas and oceans. These have a more substantial salt content and greater biodiversity in comparison to the freshwater ecosystem. Keep in mind, class, that it all depends on the different components and the extent to which you want to define the space to consider it as an ecosystem. And hence, to be able to learn more about them, ecosystems are generally divided into smaller forms. Ecology or environmental biology is the field that studies this complex set of relationships between the living organisms and their surrounding environment. The scope of this field is very large and covers things like global warming, environmental pollution, plant and animal extinctions, among others. There are two components of an ecosystem, which are in constant communication with each other. They are the biotic components of an ecosystem and the abiotic components of an ecosystem. First, we will going to tackle the biotic components of an ecosystem. The living components of an ecosystem are called the biotic components. Some of these factors include plants, animals, as well as fungi and bacteria. It includes the interactions between organisms like disease, predation, parasitism, and competition among species or within a single species. These biotic components can be further classified based on the energy requirement source. Producers, consumers, and decomposers are the three broad categories of biotic components. Producers are organisms which include plants and algae, convert abiotic factors into food. The plants in the ecosystem which can generate their own energy requirement through photosynthesis in the process of or in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll. This results in energy that producers can feed on. In fact, producers are also called autotrophs because they feed themselves. In Greek, auto means self and troph means feed or nourishment. Autotrophs make use of abiotic factors to produce their own food. All other living beings are dependent on plants for their energy requirement of food as well as oxygen. While consumers include herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores. The herbivores are the living organisms that feed on plants. Carnivores eat other living organisms. Omnivores are animals that eat both plant and animal tissue. Consumers do not make their own food. Instead, they consume producers or other consumers to obtain food energy. That is why consumers are also known as heterotrophs. Hetero means different or other because they obtain their nourishment from species other than themselves. On the other hand, decomposers are the fungi and bacteria which are the saprophytes. They feed on the decaying organic matter and convert this matter into nitrogen and carbon dioxide. The saprophytes play a vital role in recycling the nutrients so that the producers like plants can use them once again. Decomposers are also called saprotrophs, from the Greek sapros or rotten because they feed on rotting organic matter. Now, we will going to discuss about abiotic components of an ecosystem. Abiotic components are the physical and or the chemical factors that act on the living organisms at any point of their life. They are also called as the ecological factors. The physical and chemical factors vary from ecosystem to ecosystem. It can also influence other abiotic factors. In addition, they have profound impacts on the variety and abundance of life in an ecosystem, whether on land or in water. Without abiotic factors, living organisms would not be able to eat, grow, and reproduce. Some of the most significant abiotic factors are first, Sunlight. As the world's biggest source of energy, sunlight plays an essential role in most ecosystems. It provides the energy that plants use to produce food, and it affects temperature. Organisms must adapt depending on how much access they have to sunlight. The second one is oxygen, as it is essential to the majority of life forms on Earth. The reason? It is because they need oxygen in order to breathe and release energy from food. In this way, oxygen drives the metabolism of most organisms. The third one is temperature. The average temperature, range of temperature, and extremes of temperature in both air and water are all important in how organisms live and survive in an ecosystem. Temperature also affects an organism's metabolism, and species have evolved to thrive in the typical temperature range in their ecosystem. The fourth one is wind. Wind can exert many efforts on an ecosystem. It moves other abiotic factors like soil and water. It dispenses seeds and spreads fire. Winds affects temperature as well as evaporation from soil, air, surface waters, and plants, changing humidity levels. The fifth one is water. Water is essential for all life. In terrestrial or land ecosystems where water is scarce, such as deserts, organisms develop traits and behaviors that help them survive by harvesting and storing water efficiently. This can sometimes create a water source for other species as well. In ecosystems like rainforests, where the abundance of water depletes soil nutrients, many plants have special traits that let them collect nutrients before water washes them away. Water also contains nutrients, gases, and food sources that aquatic and marine species depend on, and it facilitates movement and other life functions. The sixth one is ocean currents. Ocean currents involve the movement of water, which in turn facilitates movement of biotic and abiotic factors like organisms that live in water, since currents can influence things like food availability, reproduction, and species migration. The seventh and last one is nutrients. Soil and water contain inorganic nutrients that organisms require to eat and grow. For example, minerals like phosphorus, potassium, and nitrogen found in soil are important for plant growth. Water contains many dissolved nutrients, and soil runoff can carry nutrients to aquatic and marine environments. But what about soil? It is actually composed of both biotic and abiotic components. That is why soil is an interesting case. Soil filters and stores water and anchors the roots of plants. It contains nutrients, minerals, and gases, as well as millions of microorganisms like bacteria, fungi, and single-celled organisms called archaea. These are important decomposers, the planet's indispensable recyclers. So we will now talk about the relationship between biotic and abiotic factors. Both biotic and abiotic factors can influence and constrain a species population. Factors in an ecosystem that inhibit biotic operations like population growth are called limiting factors. Consider the difference between life in ocean surface waters and a deep ocean ecosystem 13,000 feet below. Near the ocean's surface, tiny plants called phytoplankton convert the ample sunlight into energy. The phytoplankton from the base of a vast food web that a multitude of other species depend on, from dolphins and fish to the diverse organisms that compose of coral reefs. Waters are warmer near the surface, and there is more oxygen. These abiotic factors of sunlight, oxygen, and temperature, among others, affect the characteristics and behavior of organisms in the entire ecosystem. By contrast, little to no sunlight permeates deep ocean waters. The only light is produced by the creatures that live there. At these depths, organisms must be adapted to extreme pressure, which is more than 110 times greater than surface water. Life here must withstand temperatures close to freezing. The reintroduction of wolves in 1995 was a turning point. It triggered a possible trophic cascade, an event in which changes in the food web alter the structure of an ecosystem. In this case, the wolves limited the population and behavior of the elk, consequently improving other organisms' chances of survival. The elk stopped spending as much time hanging around streams.
the willow and beaver populations began to recover and beavers built more dams. This changed the course of streams, restoring wetlands. The reintroduction of the wolf was a limiting factor on the elk. As a result, other biotic components rebounded. In past, because the wolves indirectly influenced an important abiotic factors, which is the water. Ecologists also study relationships between biotic and abiotic factors to make predictions about biotic populations. Understanding how the wolf reintroduction in Yellowstone influenced other factors. Researchers can anticipate how future changes to wolf populations might affect the ecosystem. Studying these relationships can also be useful in controlling invasive species. Another recent study investigated which biotic and abiotic factors most affect wild pigs, an invasive mammal present on 5 continents. Using models that generated data about wild pigs' interactions with factors like water availability, temperature, plant productivity, predation, and human-caused land use change, the researchers create a global map predicting wild pig population densities. Identifying the factors most closely associated with population density is aiding in the management of these invasive species. Using such approaches, ecologists can devise ways to protect ecosystem biodiversity. So why do we need to study ecosystem and its components? The study of ecosystem and its components are important for environmental conservation, research allocation, reduced pollution, and destruction of ozone layer. It provides information about the benefits of environment and judicious use of Earth's resources in ways that make the environment healthy for future generations. It provides habitat to wild plants and animals. It promotes various food chains and food webs. It controls essential ecological processes and promotes lives involved in the recycling of nutrients between biotic and abiotic components. And it helps in maintaining the usual flow of energy in an ecosystem, including carbon cycle, energy cycle, nitrogen cycle, oxygen cycle, and water cycle. Apart from these importances, the ecosystem also plays an important role in controlling weeds, rotation of crop, management of grasslands, forest biological surveys, conservation of soil, wildlife, among others. We will now talk about the threats to ecosystems. Anything that attempts to alter the balance of the ecosystem potentially threatens the healthy and existence of that ecosystem. Some of these threats are not overly worrying, or they may be naturally resolved provided the natural conditions are restored. Other factors can destroy ecosystems and render all or some of its life forms extinct. The first one is habitat destruction. Economic activities such as logging, mining, farming, and construction often involve clearing out places with natural vegetative cover. Very often, tampering with one factor of the ecosystem can have a ripple effect on it and affect many more or all other factors of that ecosystem. For example, cleaning a piece of forest for timber can expose the upper layers of the soil to the sun's heat, causing erosion and drying. It can cause a lot of animals and insects that depended on the shade and moisture from the tree to die or migrate to other places. The second one is pollution. Water, land, and air pollution altogether play a crucial role in the health of ecosystems. Pollution may be natural or human-caused, but regardless, they potentially release destructive agents or chemicals or pollutants into the environments of living things. In a lake, for example, it can create havoc on the ecological balance by stimulating plant growth and causing the death of fish to suffocation resulting from lack of oxygen. The oxygen cycle will stop and the polluted water will also affect the animals dependent on the lake water. The third one is eutrophication. This is the enrichment of water bodies with plant biomass as a result of the continuous inflow of nutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus. Eutrophication of water fuels excessive plant and algae growth and also hurts water life, often resulting in the loss of flora and fauna diversity. The known consequences of cultural eutrophication include blooms of blue-green algae such as cyanobacteria, tainted drinking water supplies, degradation of recreational opportunities, and hypoxia. The fourth one is invasive species. Any foreign species like biological that finds its way into an ecosystem, either by natural or human introduction, can have an effect on the ecosystem. If this alien has the ability to prey on vulnerable and native members of that ecosystem, they will be wiped out sooner or later. One devastating impact of introducing alien Nile perch and Nile tilapia into Lake Victoria in the 1970s was the extinction of almost half of the 350 plus endemic species of fish in the cichlid family. The fifth one is overharvesting. Fish species, game, and special plants all do fall victim from time to time as a result of overharvesting or humans' overdependence on them. Overharvesting leads to the reduction in populations, community structures, and distributions, with an overall reduction in recruitment. Lots of fish species are known to have reached their maximum exploitation level, and others will soon be. For example, Oreochromis carongi is one of the most valuable food fishes in Malawi, but populations collapsed in the 1990s due to overfishing, and it is now assessed as endangered. The sixth and last one is UV radiation. The sun's rays plays an important role in living things. UV rays come in three main wavelengths: UVA, UVB, and UVC, and they have different properties. UVA has long wavelengths and reaches the Earth's surface all the time. It helps generate vitamin D for living things. UVB and UVC are more destructive and can cause DNA and cell damage to plants and animals. Ozone depletion is one way that exposes living things to UVB and UVC, and the harm caused can wipe lots of the species and affect ecosystems members, including humans. So how are we going to protect the ecosystem? In protecting the ecosystem, first we have to reduce or eliminate the use of household chemicals and pesticides that can hurt the environment. We can make our own cleaning solutions using distilled vinegar and baking soda, or we can also purchase green cleaning products. The second one is recycle as much waste as we can and reduce the amount of waste we produce. We can create separate bins in our houses and label them for glass, plastic, paper, and aluminum. Then take our bins to our nearest recycling center. The third one is reducing our waste can be one of the best ways to help the environment. Rather than using disposable paper towels, use reusable towels that can be washed rather than thrown away. Use reusable bags at the grocery store rather than using disposable plastic or paper bags. The fourth one is reduce our carbon footprint. There are numerous ways to cut back on how much we pollute, resulting in a smaller carbon footprints. In our houses, we can turn our hot water heater down a few degrees. Wash dishes in the sink rather than the dishwater. Take showers rather than baths. Turn down our air conditioner or heater and use energy-efficient light bulbs and electronics. Choose transportation that pollutes less, such as public transportation and choosing to take a train over taking a plane. The fifth and last one is to choose foods that are locally grown and grown sustainably. The industrial food system requires food to be transported from all over the country and internationally, and for food to be grown abundantly, which requires pesticides. The transportation methods transporting food pollute the environment, but local foods do not need to be transported far. Organically grown food is also more sustainably because it does not use pesticides, which harm ecosystems. Your local farmers market is a way to find locally grown food and organically grown food. So that ends our discussion for today's lesson about the components of an ecosystem. I fervently hope that everything is clear and thoroughly explained. I hope that you have learned something about our topic. If there are no questions already, then prepare for your application. Now, let us have another activity. I will be reading each sentences that defines a certain word related to what we have discussed today. All you have to do is identify what is the word being determined by this statement. I will only reading the question twice, so you better listen to me very carefully. Write your answers legibly on a 1/4 sheet of yellow paper, and the student or students who will answer all the questions correctly will be given a plus 5 points for the quiz later on. So be attentive as the statement is being uttered. Understood? Okay, so the first question is, what is the geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms as well as weather and landscape work together to form a bubble of life? Again, what is the geographic area where plants, animals, and other organisms as well as weather and landscape work together to form a bubble of life? The second question is, what is the living components of an ecosystem called? Again, what is the living components of an ecosystem called? The third question is, what are organisms which include plants and algae that convert abiotic factors into food being called? Again, what are organisms which include plants and algae that convert abiotic factors into food being called? The fourth question is, what are the physical and chemical factors that act on the living organisms at any part of their life being called? Again, what are the physical and chemical factors that act on the living organisms at any part of their life being called? The fifth and last question is, what is the world's biggest source of energy that plays an essential role in most ecosystems as it provides the energy that plants use to produce food and it affects temperature? Again, what is the world's biggest source of energy that plays an essential role in most ecosystems as it provides the energy that plants use to produce food and it affects temperature? Alright, good job everyone! Congratulations to those students who answered all the questions correctly. You earned 5 points for your evaluation to be given right after. So here are your evaluation sheets. Kindly pass them to your other classmates. Read the directions carefully and suffice the correct answers to every question. Assignment: make a diagram showing the importance of the components of an ecosystem in today's world. Practice creativity and neatness. Prepare your work of art, for it will be presented during our class session tomorrow. Good luck with your evaluation and do your assignment. Have a great day ahead!